Hi, folks. General Manager Tony Mazzucco coming to you with our weekly COVID update and on our weekly Facebook Live update. We're going to get started in just a minute as folks log on. Make sure my sound and my picture are good here. We'll get going in just a moment here. We've got quite a bit to talk about with COVID as well as some other town updates, but we'll be going into our COVID numbers in just a moment. Hey, Catherine, thanks for joining us today and every week. And thank you, Catherine, for being a town meeting member. We always appreciate town meeting members. We're going to talk about town meeting today as we have town meeting coming up. So we've got some good news and some bad news as it relates to the town's COVID numbers. I think as everyone knows, the state now releases their numbers later on a Thursday, but we do get our numbers regularly, so we're able to take a look at our numbers a little bit ahead of that and run our own numbers. The bad news is we're going to be in the red again. Last week, our case count per 100,000 was 8.1. This week it'll be 10.5, so that's actually up a little bit. And the way we're seeing the numbers trending, it looks like there's a good possibility we'll be into the red for even a third week, although we don't know for sure yet. But the numbers might be right around where they've been, 30 to 40 cases in a 2-week period. But we've got some data to talk about with that. Hey, Michelle, thanks for joining us. So it's going to be a little tough for everyone to see, but this will be on our data report that we publish every week in the health department. And kudos to Sagala for actually putting a lot of the data together. This is, we've shown folks this chart before. This is our COVID chart from the beginning. So that's sort of the total cases of COVID. You can see where they spiked in April and then they've come down ever since, and there's a slight increase. One of the things we've done, and again, we'll be able to get this data chart up in the next day or two, is we've plotted out where we would be red, yellow, or green going back to the beginning of the year. Now, that's last week's chart. When this one comes up, it'll have all this additional data on there as well. And Frank, we will absolutely talk about town meeting and how town meeting goes to an online platform and some of the complexities of that. So we were in the red up until the end of May, and then it dropped precipitously to green, and it was green all the way until about the end of August. So on the one hand, using that cases per 100,000, the numbers are up. But there's a caveat to that. Some public health officials are advocating for the state to look at a number of measures to sort of determine whether you're green, red, or yellow. One of those measures might be looking at, for instance, your percent positive rate. Now, I want to show this chart, and I know it's tough to see for everyone at home, but if you see that green line there, that's actually our percent positive rate from the very beginning. The first time is from the beginning of March when we started looking at this. And you'll notice that the blue chart is two things. The blue is total tests, and the red is the percentage of those tests that are positive. I feel like this is a math class here, so if anyone's falling asleep, I apologize. But what you'll see has happened in the last 6 to 7 months, the percent positive rate has actually continued to decline. The testing rate has continued to increase in Norwood. You notice we had a little dip right about here, but that blue bar represents the total number of tests, and it continues to climb. Now, the red portion is the percent of tests that are positive. If you remember back to here, April and May, we were only testing people who were symptomatic. So if you just wanted a test, you couldn't get one. At some point, that did change, probably somewhere around here where testing became more widely available. Now, if we did half as many tests, that percent positive rate may actually go up. But it's very telling to see that if you go back to here, sort of at our peak, 25 to 35% of people were testing positive, but we were only testing symptomatic individuals. Right around when we seemed to hit a lull late June and into July, the numbers were still around 4 to 5%. So in July, we were at twice as much in terms of the percentage of people testing positive who were getting a COVID test. But the number of tests, if you look at this up here, continues to go up. And I'm quite amazed by that. There seemed to be a little bit of a dip in the numbers after Norwood Hospital closed. We don't know if it's related to that. They will actually be opening a COVID trailer, I believe, the second week of November for additional testing in the community. So on the one hand, our sort of raw numbers, the number of people testing positive is up. That's a bad thing. That's always a bad thing, and it will always be a bad thing. If we want to look at some of the positives of the data, the percent positive of people is at just around 2%, which is much lower than the state's average of, I believe, 6 or 7. So that's a much better category. Our testing continues to go up. Now, part of the increase in testing, and this is one of the reasons why that percent positive rate is somewhat depressed, is people going to travel. people maybe going back to school or having to go back to the office. So there's a lot of testing that's going on that's not directly related to somebody being symptomatic, but it's still an indication that the data is worth looking at. A couple of other positives in terms of the data. I mean, more testing is good. The fact that the percent positive rate is low is very good. We're averaging in a 2-week period 2,700 tests or so, which I think is very good. Our average case count, our average age for our cases continues to drop. It seems like it drops about a half a year every week. So when we were initially testing, the average case age was older. As of right now, if we go back since March, it's about 53 years old is the average age of somebody testing positive. The last 30 days, it's dropped to about 37 as an average age. I can tell you the last 2 weeks, our positive cases, a majority of them are people in their 20s. So we are seeing, as you're seeing statewide and elsewhere, that the average age of somebody testing positive is dropping quite a bit. That's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but what it's showing is that it's spreading among younger people where it does tend to be more mild. Now, those younger individuals could come into contact with somebody who is immunocompromised or is older and more susceptible to serious risk from COVID. But all of our cases currently are mild. What we're seeing are mild recoveries. That does not mean that COVID is any less dangerous today than it was a month ago or 6 months ago. But on the positive side, the level of illness in the community as of today is actually very low, and that's a good thing. You're seeing that trend out statewide to a certain degree. And it's not to say that some people aren't getting sick or aren't suffering loss of life or serious complications from COVID. That is absolutely still happening. But right now, today in Norwood, what we're seeing is the percent of people testing positive is low, among the lowest it's ever been. The testing is about the highest it's ever been. Cases are mostly among younger individuals, and they're mostly mild cases with people, even people in their 40s and 50s, getting over them within a couple of days and being otherwise healthy. Those are all good things. So where are cases coming from? There's a couple of things we want to talk about in relation to that. There's no link to catching COVID and going to a restaurant or a retail store. We've had cases in the schools, but there's not spread in the schools. It's somebody who's gotten positive, tested positive from an activity elsewhere, and then they happen to be in school. By the time they know about it, then they have to be taken out of school. The contact tracing happens. It's about that risk level of what you're doing. And if you, like I always say, if two couples were to go out and you were to go out to a restaurant in town versus going to somebody's house, being out in public, there's a marginal increase in the risk. But on the other hand, if you spend more time, you have a few more drinks, you're not necessarily wearing masks as often at somebody's house, you could see the same or even a greater risk there. It comes down to what you're doing when you're not exposed to risk, on the one hand, and two, are you otherwise following protocols when you are exposed to risk, and how much you're exposing yourself? One of the things we keep advising, looking at our data when we do our contact tracing and we see who's testing positive and we see who their other cases are, and usually it's a lot of household cases, which is one of the challenges where you get a positive case. If they live with 5 people in a house, there's a good chance at least 2 or 3 of those people are also going to test positive. So you know every case generally relates to a couple other people testing positive. I know last week somebody asked, is there an average number of contacts? There's really not. It really depends on what you've done. And you may have tested positive and happen to have been at a wedding a month before, or 1 month before wouldn't happen, but been in a wedding a couple days before and you have a ton of contacts, whereas outside that wedding, you don't see anyone. What we're advising people is to try to keep your circle small. And when you either expand outside your circle or when you maybe are in a larger group setting, just think about how often and how frequently you're doing that. And if you can give yourself a few days in between doing it, that's always best. So if 2 couples always go out to dinner every Saturday night, there's relatively no risk in that if you're otherwise being safe. There is some risk. Remember, those are 2 households coming together. There's a risk that if somebody in one of those households is sick, it's going to transfer it to the other person and that whole other household in all of their contacts as well. But if you do that fairly regularly, the contact tracing is fairly easy to do. We know sort of who you've been out with, you know who you've been out with. The risk becomes when, let's say, 2 couples go out on Saturday night and then Sunday they decide to go to brunch with another couple that's completely different. And then Tuesday night they went out for pizza with, the kids and their spouses. Well, now in a 3 or 4 day period, that initial couple, call them couple zero, has exposed themselves to 5 or 6 other different sort of circles that they're not normally in. The advice would be when you go out with groups and different people that you don't normally see, try to limit that. So you go out with a couple of friends and you have a good time, that's fine. Pay attention to what you're doing the next couple of days. You'll usually hear within a few days about contact tracing and whether or not you needed to be contact traced. Not that I want everyone to say, all right, we went out with the Johnsons on Friday night, so now let's not do anything for 5 days to wait and see here if we have to get contact traced. We don't want that, but just sort of be aware of it and try to space them out. I think I let everyone know I did a small wedding in August, and I was very kind of cautious the next week, like let me sort of wait and see how things happen. Kept my circle kind of small after that until the period of time had passed. If I were to go out with folks outside of my circle, it's sort of, okay, let me wait and see how long, give it a couple of days before time passes. So that way, before you go out with folks again, because it's about those personal decisions. Again, you could go out once in 6 months with another couple and somebody could have COVID and you could end up catching COVID. You could go out 10 times with 10 different couples and everyone could be fine, but that risk of exposure increases the more you're seeing people and the more you're spending time with people. Washing hands is important. Wearing your mask is important. We had a big meeting today talking about our data, and I think what we're seeing is that if you look at how open society is and how much activity there is, we're confident that people are doing well. It's really coming down to, especially with the mild spread, especially with the relatively low percent positive rate and how much activity is out there. I mean, parochial schools have been in person since the beginning of September. We've been in a hybrid model since around the middle or late September. So there's people out there, there's activity, things are happening, kids are in school, people are starting to go back to work, people are going out to restaurants and into retail stores. So we believe by and large people are being good and doing good things. We just need that to continue, to keep the spread small, to keep the hospital count small, keep the cases mild. If the cases are just mild every month and every year, then that's a good thing. That means that there's no serious risk or harm for people in the community. Nobody's suffering and nobody's losing their life over COVID if we can keep it relatively small in terms of the spread and what we're doing. So it's very important to manage yourself accordingly, or I should say to govern yourself accordingly when it comes to your own behavior. It really does come down to personal decisions. A lot of the spread that we see is workplace spread where people work closely together. And it's not just that there's an office building with 500 people in it. I don't think we actually have any office buildings with that many people in it. But it's the people you work closely with, you're going to likely spread COVID to them or vice versa if one of you is sick, even if you're wearing masks, if you work very close. Not that you were in the same building, but the fact that if you share a cubicle with somebody, if anyone's still doing that, if you have 2 or 3 plumbers or carpenters on a team, that can happen. That's where we're seeing a lot of the spread. The other places we're seeing it is people going to larger social gatherings, generally parties. I hate sounding like a downer to say that parties are bad, but parties are where we're seeing a lot of the spread. Again, it's more people, it's in close quarters. Usually parties for adults tend to contain a little bit of drinking, maybe a little bit of dancing. Those things all increase the spread. We know that life has to go on and humans have to be humans, but we're seeing it in the workplace where people work very closely, and we're seeing it at a lot of really social events where people are gathering. Now, those events appear to be dropping off a little bit. I think there's less sort of backyard barbecues, but we know the holidays are coming up. It's a little bit risky with the holidays. I know the governor has asked people to try to keep it small for the holidays, and I think our advice would be the same, is as small as you can reasonably keep it is a smart idea for the holidays. Speaking of holidays, Halloween is this weekend. We have mentioned to folks what our Halloween guidance is. Avoid parties, avoid haunted houses. If you want to do trick-or-treating, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. If you do it, please wear a mask. And again, we make the joke, wear a cloth mask or something and a Halloween mask. Try to either have candy out on a tray in little baggies for people to take. Some folks are doing the PVC pipes. I'm sure there's a bunch of folks out there who are going to want to turn that into a big project where you sort of drop the candy through a chute. That's certainly something able to do. But if you're going to do it, it can be done safely. It's an outdoor activity. We know that outdoor spread is very minimal. And try to keep to your family and your neighborhood. I know that might be tough if there's some neighborhoods not participating, but keep it small and keep it within your family. And Halloween can be a simple and safe holiday and a safe way to participate. If you are giving out candy as a trick-or-treater, please be wearing a mask. That's all we ask. Wear that mask. If you can do a tray, if you can do a PVC pipe, that's the best in the world, but just please wear a mask. We have a bunch of other topics actually to go on. Are there any questions about our COVID numbers or precautions or preparations before I move on to a few other topics? Because I know I threw a lot of data and charts and everything out there. All right, well, you can always ask us, and again, you can always email us, or the health department. So the next item I want to talk about is the election. And I have just earlier I received from the town clerk a fascinating statistic. The voter turnout in Norwood, as of right now, is already 46%. 46% of registered voters in the town of Norwood have already voted in this presidential election. That is incredible. The clerk's office is doing incredible work. We've been averaging 300 people a day for early voting and about 500 to 600 ballots a day for mail-in voting. Now, today was the last day to register for a mail-in ballot. Tomorrow is the last day of early voting. 8:30 to 12:30 at Town Hall, Memorial Hall, is the last time you can early vote. If you didn't get to early voting, you can vote at the polls, but I would encourage you to early vote tomorrow if you can. And if you can't, the polls will be open Tuesday, 7 to 8. You will vote at your normal voting location. So that will be your normal voting precinct. We'll have additional staff and additional safety and security. We'll have staff behind shields, I shouldn't say shields, the plastic barriers that they've had before for the election. But kudos to the clerk's office for the incredible work they've done, and to the town of Norwood. 46% voter turnout already. That's absolutely incredible. School lunch program. Next topic need to bring up. Throughout November and into December, we're doing our weekly family meal program. And you can sign up through the link on the school website, on the food service website, and it's a free family meal for folks who have students in Norwood, our kids in Norwood. It's a free meal. It's delicious. It's produced by our exceptional food service workers. I encourage you to give it a try. It's funded through Norwood Bank, as well as the Norwood Fund, and a little bit of our CARES Act funding. So it's a great program. Some people have reached out to me about ways to help out with that or other food programs. We will be getting back to people with some different options as things change a little bit during the winter, and now we're sort of into a new phase of food security and trying to address food security issues. Also, for anyone who has children in Norwood, there's the regular school breakfast and lunch program. It is free. It is 100% free. It does not take a meal from anyone else. We'll get that information posted in the comments as well. If you have children in Norwood, and they don't have to just go to the Norwood Public Schools, they can go to St. Catherine's. And last week, somebody actually asked a question about the meal program expanding to St. Catherine's, and it has. I don't have the specific details, but I know information was worked out, sent out to St. Catherine's parents last week in food service. And St. Catherine's were able to work out a plan where they're going to be able to bring lunches to St. Catherine's, which I think is great. So if your kids go to any other school, it could be a charter school, it could be a private school, it could be homeschooled, it could be a religious school, they live in Norwood, you're able to take advantage of the weekly lunch program. It takes no food from anyone else. It helps keep the cafeteria program running. The federal government has granted a waiver for a number of towns through the end of the year. So it actually helps the food service program, keeps our food service workers working, and we appreciate our cafeteria workers who have worked every single day of this pandemic. So please, if you can take advantage of it, please take advantage of it. We encourage you to do so. Those couple days a week that the kids are home, why not get a lunch at no cost for the kids? So please, please, please take advantage of that. Let's go into talking about town meeting, because we've gotten a few questions on that one. I'm actually going to pull up an email I got from somebody from Michael Chen, although I believe it's probably the same as Frank's question about migrating the town meeting to an online platform to reduce risk. So there's a couple of things I want to mention here as I pull up this email. The decision over doing town meeting digitally or doing it in person this particular year is a little complicated. And the reason is that it's not just a decision of whether we want to do it or not. There's a complex body of laws about town meeting having already been called. Unfortunately, when the state wrote the law allowing us to do a remote town meeting, they gave you the option, if you've already called town meeting, but you didn't call it as a remote meeting, to then transform it to a remote meeting. if that meeting took place before June 30th. Well, the state was thinking it's the end of the fiscal year. It's really just to get the fiscal year wrapped up and let's see what we can do. If they hadn't had that frustrating June 30th language in there, we wouldn't have a problem. We have a problem because the town meeting was already called. And once you've issued a warrant to call a town meeting, you have to hold that town meeting. There's no element in the law that allows you to just change it or to rescind a warrant and just say, oh, pretend that never happened, let's get rid of the warrant. It's a little further complicated by the fact that when the planning board hosts a hearing, that hearing is with the assumption that town meeting takes place on a certain date. If you change that, you then have to rehold those hearings. The other complication is there's a very specific way you have to end a town meeting in an effort to take no negative action on land use articles. Otherwise, you might run afoul of the issue that a land use article that's defeated, so that's changing zoning, once defeated, is generally not allowed to be brought back before the body for 2 years. So by simply trying to cancel town meeting, we would run into the issue that it may be considered a negative land use action, and we can't bring any of those land use ordinances back for 2 years. We were in the green when the meeting was called. Unfortunately, town meeting gets called well ahead of time. It gets posted. Everything looked like it was rosy, and then a number started to come up. The challenge that the selectman and the moderator faced was, how do we get to what we want to do within the confines of what's allowable under the law so that our actions are legal? What's been come up with, at least for the upcoming town meeting, and in the future, doing a remote town meeting is much more possible. As of right now, the way the law stands, the moderator has to request that. So the selectmen could want to do a remote town meeting as much as they want, and the body could want to do it, but the moderator does have to actually request that. So the moderator is an elected official and has a key role in town meeting, if nothing else. So the moderator will always have to request that in the future. Technologically, we can do it. We can make it work. We've heard from folks who are concerned about not being able to access town meeting because of health concerns. We have heard from folks who are concerned about being able to access town meeting because they don't necessarily have the technology or they don't feel comfortable with the technology. So it's a catch-22. But from sort of an administrative standpoint, we can prepare the technology, we can call a digital town meeting, and I feel confident that we could do it. It's the complexity of sort of how you get there. So what does the board working with the moderator come up with in the interim? We think, after talking to a number of lawyers, including the Attorney General, the Attorney General's office, the Department of Revenue, our attorneys, bond counsel, labor counsel, donut counsel, I mean, every lawyer that's out there, what we think we can do for the November 12th town meeting is town meeting still needs to meet. We can't cancel a warrant. We also have to, I guess this is one of the other items I should have mentioned that makes it complex. If we were just talking about maybe a little bit of land use or some bylaw changes, we could just postpone the meeting a little bit, find out how to do it, and make it happen. We have to balance our budget to be able to set the tax rate. We have to set the tax rate before the calendar year ends so that we can get tax bills out with an actual number, so that way the town can actually receive the revenue it needs to operate. So if this was in the winter, it wouldn't be such a big deal, but we have to balance the budget to set the tax rate. The only changes we're making to the budget are as a result of state aid being reduced, and we have to move money around in the budget so that the state will accept the budget as being a balanced budget. So it's sort of like the perfect storm of all these things that have to be done according to certain timelines, and the laws that the state established to allow us to do a remote town meeting are not flexible enough to accommodate all of these different things. And maybe that's a good thing, that it's not just a decision that can be made on the whim. Laws generally aren't designed to be that flexible. But what have we done about it? What can we do? What Board of Selectmen are proposing and the moderator agrees to is that town meeting will meet on the 12th. Town meeting will have to take up the 3 budget articles. That will get the budget balance. It'll get our capital appropriations and authorizations. It'll give the school department the money for the hybrid model and for the remote learning academy. And then the body would vote to dissolve the second meeting before action is taken. That's not considered a negative action. Once that meeting has been dissolved, the selectmen are able to then call as a digital meeting or as a remote meeting that same warrant for a later date, possibly December or January. I mean, we're not talking about kicking it off to the spring. The longer we kick off town meeting actions, the longer it's going to be. So I know that's incredibly complicated. And it sounds incredibly bureaucratic, and this is why everyone gets frustrated with government about why can't you just do this or why can't you do that. And the bottom line is we are restricted by a number of state laws that govern how we need to act. Because remember, how we need to take actions on certain things. Because remember, when town meeting meets, and town meeting, for those of you who are new to local government or new to the town of Norwood, that's our elected representative body, 270 members, that meets a few times a year. They're responsible for zoning, for town bylaws, and for appropriations. Town meeting passes laws. So our ability to, when town meeting meets, they're actually passing laws and they're appropriating money. We can spend no funds from the town that have not been appropriated by town meeting. So it's kind of, thank you, Catherine. It's one of those things that I'm glad you appreciate the explanation. It's more complicated than just doing it or not doing it. For those of you like me who are local government nerds, what's further complicated it is our ability to hold remote meetings, selectmen's meetings, school committee meetings, zoning board meetings. That was done by an executive order of the governor that suspends certain portions of the open meeting law. Town meeting is actually not subject to the open meeting law. It's just for other governmental bodies. Town meeting is not subject to the state's conflict of interest law as well. Town meeting always has this sort of status as a very important body in Massachusetts that has all the authority in the world to do what it wants to do, except meet remotely. But here's the really funny point. Even when we want to meet remotely, even when we go through this complicated process to get through all these legal canals to get to where we want to be, we dissolve town meeting, we call a remote town meeting with the same exact warrant for January. The first item town meeting has to vote on, even though they're remotely, is whether or not to hold that meeting remotely. Nobody said what would happen if town meeting all got on remotely and voted not to happen the meeting remotely. My guess is, I don't know, it would be like a constitutional crisis that we've never heard of before. But I would assume that because town meeting members knew we were meeting remotely, they would vote to hold it remotely. So apologies for the sort of the long and complicated story there, but we do believe we'll have to meet. We've reduced the quorum, get through a couple of budget articles. The balancing the budget is pretty simple. Later tonight, we're going to go over those articles and the rest of the non-land use articles. We may do a Q&A session right before town meeting as well as a chance to get people to ask questions. So hopes that town meeting members will come prepared and ready to vote. There's always that question about, do you go to town meeting to debate, or is it really doing its job if they're just voting yes? And it's sort of a catch-22. If you want to debate something at town meeting, that's what it's there for. I've always taken the approach of I prefer folks to come into town meeting with enough knowledge to make a decision. Their neighbors may want to persuade them one way or another, but I don't want people going into town meeting saying, well, I don't know anything about this and I don't know anything about that. And it's hard, right? I mean, we put 2 information sessions online and we put them up about a week ahead of time. And some people were a little upset. They said, oh, we didn't really get notice about this and we weren't really sure. We had about 20 people to the land use one last night, which is actually very good. We had mailed every town meeting member a notice about a land use one that the planning department did even several weeks ago. I think we only got 6 people to it. So we used to do next to no town meeting prep. Now we're trying to do a lot more. It's a catch-22. If you tell people 45 days ahead of time, here's the 2 or 3 budget meetings or the 2 or 3 information sessions, people may not, there are some people, they will go and mark that time on their calendar and make sure that they're there. There are some people who could know 6 months ahead of time and wouldn't be able to, or wouldn't necessarily know that they were willing to do that. Let me just confirm, I had a question about remote town meeting, and it was forwarded to me from Bernie. Let me look at this. But anyway, we will likely be doing a remote town meeting in January. Towns have done it. It does come at a cost. Everyone's done a little bit of a different platform. Some people have done in-person meetings, even partial meetings. Okay, yep. So the question I got from Michael was roughly the same thing about town meeting in person. We are going to explore a hybrid model. It's sort of in a legal gray zone because, as I said, what allows the hybrid model is the I bank on the recording since 7 p.m. is prime kiddo meltdown time. Well, they've been recorded and they will be replayed. I think a hybrid town meeting would be the best option. The challenge is we've just got to kind of navigate making sure that it's legal, again, because town meeting passes laws, and that's why it's important. We actually talked to one of our attorneys. We talked to our bond counsel. And for those of you who don't know, bond counsel is the attorney who advises you on when you go out to issue bonds or issue debt to borrow for capital projects. And we happened to name a town that they happen to also be bond counsel from. And we said, well, they're considering doing it hybrid. And they said, uh-oh, they haven't told us that yet. We better call them. So we got some other town into trouble, but that's okay. So the goal would be to try to do it hybrid if we can. We're just not 100% sure that we can do it that way, but we're moving towards it. I think that would be the best model. Town meeting tonight, if you can, 7 o'clock. It will be recorded. It's a sort of a presentation and a Q&A on the different articles that are non-land use. We did land use last night. We're doing land use tonight. Non-land use tonight. So we will be doing that for town meeting. Any other questions about town meeting or how we kind of got to the convoluted way of getting to be a kind of remote town meeting after we just show up and pass a couple articles and go home, and hopefully enough people do. Otherwise, we can't set the tax rate, and then it's a nightmare. All right. I have two announcements, and I want to talk about one issue that came up just yesterday and today. Two retirements to announce, both of which we're happy and sad that these folks are happy that they're able to retire, but sad to have them retire. One of them is Jim Schmidt, who's a longtime resident of Norwood, is retiring from filming events at the senior center. Jim Schmidt, for those of you who don't know, is a retired. He's retired and volunteers a lot of time at the senior center. Jim was a fighter pilot in World War II, and at 97 still films regularly for the Council on Aging. He actually tried to retire from doing it several years ago, and we just wouldn't let him retire. He came back out of retirement to keep doing it, but now he's going back into retirement from filming. So kudos to Jim for his many years of service. He's been serving his community, his country, one way or another, his entire life, and we love Jim very much. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention his friend Bill McCoy, because when I think of the two of them, I think of the two guys from the Muppets that are up in the opera space there. But kudos to Jim on retiring. And then one other retirement: Deputy Police Chief Peter Kelly is retiring after 33 incredible years of service to the town of Norwood. He is Norwood born and bred and has served us. He's a former class president, as I found out. He served the community and the police department very well, keeping us safe for very many years. And we wish him well in his retirement. We're certainly going to be sad to see Peter retire, but we're happy that he had a wonderful 33-year career with us. And the other issue is we got one message. Folks may have seen the press release put out by the fire department about the Norwood Commerce Center being closed. And it's kind of a funny story how this came about. There was a small fire there a few days ago. It was up on the second or third floor. And the fire itself was not that big of a issue. However, after the fire department accessed and the chief were in the building, they had to call the building inspector. There was a large number of construction that had gone on without permits. And we're not talking about just sort of replacing a window or putting up some drywall. There were substantial projects that have been done without any building permits whatsoever. If you actually go on to the best place to get the press release, I don't know if we've put it out on all of our pages yet, but it's out there on the the fire department's page. It's there are too many numerous violations. Our hearts certainly go out to the businesses that have to close as a result of that have been operating there, especially many of the businesses who have been operating without any code issues, who did have permits and who were otherwise legitimate. Unfortunately, there were so many life safety issues found in that building, especially on the upper floors, that it is not safe for folks to be working out of there. It is not safe for the public to be visiting there. And it is absolutely not safe for any of our firefighters or our police officers to be in that building. It would cause serious issues if there was a major fire there, both our ability to extricate anyone from there and the safety of our officers and firefighters in there. So it's unfortunate. We're going to continue to work with them the best we can. But unfortunately, life safety does take into play here. Somebody had asked me, they said, well, these businesses had opened, and did we know about it or did we not know about it? Certain businesses we don't permit. So retail is an example of something that we don't permit. So if you rented a storefront in downtown in Norwood Center or in South Norwood, and you were just selling cell phones here, there's no real permits you get. If you're not altering your premises, there's no permit to sell retail. So there's really next to no interaction with the town unless you're working on the building, in which case you need to pull a building permit. Food establishments have a food permitting process. There is a zoning process that you go through, but a typical retail store opening requires no permits unless they're working on the building. So when you go into a building and all of a sudden you see that 20 or 30 offices and studios have been constructed without any permits, there's about a dozen bathrooms that have been constructed without any permits. There was a 20-seat theater in there doing little movies and live performances of some kind that no permits, no fire safety, no life safety, no none of that. That's when we know about it, is when somebody pulls a permit. They come in and they say, I want to build a store here. I want to change this out. And then we review the zoning, we review the permit, we make sure everything's up to code for everyone's safety. Auto dealers are required to get permits to sell. I don't know if an auto repair shop is required to get a permit, but there's codes that are required for an auto repair shop. And that was one of the issues that was found there, is that there was auto body repair going on in the basement of a 100-year-old wooden mill building without any of the normal fire or life safety precautions that you would have. So some of those are pretty serious life safety issues. We've received complaints in the past about junk here or there, trash complaints. Those things happen, they get addressed, and you deal with them as you can. But the number of code violations were substantial, and it's unfortunate. But the fire chief and the deputy fire chiefs had to shut the building down. The building commissioner. It's about the safety of people. We become liable once we're aware of these substantial issues, and a lot of it was on the upper floors. Not necessarily where you go in and like buy the antiques and stuff, where that stuff was. It was on floors where permits hadn't been issued for the a lot of the work. Kate's question was, the Norwood Arts Association included? I'm not an expert on the building, but I believe it was the 3 largest buildings. So my guess is if it's there, then it should have been included. The cease and desist was posted today, so the landlord should have notified tenants. But that would be worth looking into whether or not you were in there. Again, not being an expert on the building, everyone refers to the buildings by numbers, and the press release might have more details, but I sort of only know it as building. To me, it seems to be one big, large building. One of the challenges, I think, is some of the fire breaks in between the buildings had actually been removed over time, and that causes an issue. Buildings like that, believe it or not, old mill buildings, when they were designed, they designed them very well, and they designed them very smart. And even nowadays, modern buildings have a fire break in between a giant building. So if you see a big, long issues. Now, see, Doris, I guess I disagree with you, because there have been no officials that have visited the upper floors where a substantial amount of work has been done, even just in the last year. What was going on the ground floor there, you're right, was completely legal and legitimate and permitted. That's not what the problem was. The problem was what was found on upper floors, which was found as a result of folks doing construction without permits. So when you have a large building like that, it's possible that while some parts of the building may otherwise be following the rules, when it becomes a life safety issue, it's tough to just have certain parts of the building open. That may be how they get up and running sooner rather than later. But remember that a permitted use is also not the same as a building permit or meeting a building or a safety code. So if the zoning board, for instance, says, sure, you can open a retail store somewhere, if you're required to get a building permit, you are still required to get a building permit. If you're required to bring something up to ADA compliance, you still have to do that. A zoning permit does not allow that. A planning permit does not allow that. The health board only inspects whether there's trash, some general life safety, but it's really mainly trash or garbage complaints, or food and food service. So that's where you have that difference, that yes, people do go into those buildings, and most of the use, my understanding, I don't know if it's the ground floor or the first floor where a lot of the retail was completely legitimate. The problem is that there's been so much work done to the building without a permit that has triggered code compliance. They've also blocked off other parts of the building. And remember, that part of the building that's legitimate and legal and everything is good doesn't mean that there's only going to be a fire in those parts of the building, and I have to send a firefighter into that whole building. I have to send a cop to walk through that whole building and try to rescue either patrons or people that are there. So it becomes a serious issue. There was an immense amount of work done to that building without permits. And it's not just that we want to ding somebody for a permit, it's they seriously changed what went on with that building. Kate, I could not agree with you more. I don't blame any of these tenants. It's about who owns a building and who runs a building. Sometimes you can make an argument you don't know what your tenants are doing, but when you're doing construction without a permit, you generally know what was going on. And at the end of the day, we have responsibility for life safety of both the people working there the people who are visiting it, the public, and especially for our first responders who have to respond to those buildings when there's a concern. When you do things like block off fire exits, that becomes a concern for anyone in the building, but particularly a first responder trying to exit that building when they're making an extrication. There's also concerns over when you do work, it triggers different levels of code compliance. So the building has very little ADA compliance. It's rarely, if ever, the tenant's fault, but somebody ultimately is responsible. And once certain officials are made aware of it, it becomes challenging. Hey, Brian, thank you for joining us. So as I said, you look at everything that was being done there, and it's a really cool place. There's a lot of energy there, a lot of great creative economy initiatives going on, and that helps you generate the revenue for whoever the owner of the building is. But there comes a point for life safety, which is paramount. What are the repercussions for tenants and plans to get compliant? So I'll take the second question first. In terms of plans to get compliant, that's really up to the property owner or manager. Sometimes they're owned by sort of a real estate company or something, and they have a manager there. They can get compliant, and there's different levels there based on the specific needs that building and fire have. Sometimes it's, hey, we want to put a theater on the 4th floor, and it's okay. Well, by the time you go through all the code from that, it might take you a million years and $100 million. So you might say, okay, well, what if we don't do that? All right, well, now you're at a lower level. As for the tenants, because of the shutdown, they really need to talk to their landlord, and that's where I assume, if I was one of them, that because a landlord has, and this is just my own speculation, if a landlord has allowed construction to take place without a permit and it's caused your business or you as a tenant to suffer as a result, then that's who they should be having those conversations with, that the building has been deemed unsafe. Luckily, nobody was living there. It becomes a much more difficult situation when you have to shut down a building where somebody was living, because then you have to find housing and you have to make sure they have housing. So I feel awful for the tenants. It's just a matter of whoever owns or manages the building, and I don't know the exact structure there, has allowed so much to happen that it's now caused serious harm for the tenants who, in good faith, moved into a space and have been operating safely for quite a while. As for actually getting compliant, it depends on how quickly they move, what they're willing to do, and how they can make their business operate. And then it comes down to dollars and cents too, right? Because at some point, if it's you have to build A, B, or C, or you have to do X, Y, or Z, it becomes, is it worth the dollar amount for the rents you're going? And that's not really us for us to determine. There are some zoning issues with the property. That being said, zoning sort of takes a back seat to life safety. But it's unfortunate. It really is. If the Cultural Council wants to try to work on something to help out some of those artists, I don't know if there's finding other spaces. I don't, retail sales is not my purview, but it'd be wonderful if we could try to do something to help them out. And we're certainly open to discussing anything that can be done. It's just the building has been, what we actually issue is a cease and desist order for the operating of the building. They're being given a couple days to clear out anything they need to clear out. And it depends on how long ownership or management there can bring the building into compliance. Again, it's for what they want to do. If you had a completely empty 3rd floor and you built out one little studio space and that triggers a lot of code compliance, you could always say, all right, well, we're just not going to do that. What do we need to do now? I know one of the other issues was the fire rating as it relates to the commodities in the building. So the building, parts of the building have a sprinkler system, but your sprinkler system needs to be designed sort of for your use and how much stuff, if you will, or commodities are in the building. So usually what you need is a fire engineer to look at that and say, okay, based on the patron flow and based on this and based on what's in the building, your system needs to do X, Y, and Z. Can it do X, Y, and Z? If it can't, then how do you make it do X, Y, and Z, and whether or not that's feasible or cost effective. It may be that the simplest solution is to try to scale back to just what they were doing on that sort of 1st floor there, but I don't know. That really does become an issue for the plumbing, gas, and electrical inspectors, the building inspector, as well as the fire chief, feeling that they can safely enter and exit the building and reasonably make a safe rescue there if they have to. So again, it's unfortunate, but safety is important. And as I said, a lot of times once you become aware of these things, it's action has to be taken. And the last, I don't know when it was done recently, I mean, part of that 2nd or 3rd floor was under construction when the fire department was there. So some of this is very recent. It's not like something was done and it operated for 5 or 10 years. There's been some very recent construction there. I was talking about inspections. Larry Food was talking about they worked for a year and a boatload of money to try and open a gym. Yes, they've been there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've witnessed building violations. One of the other things is different individuals have different statutory reporting responsibilities. So a planning board member is not going to know if construction has taken place without a permit, and it's not his responsibility to know or to enforce that. It's not a zoning official's responsibility to understand or know if the health code is being violated. We're not just sort of all bureaucrats where we all know all the codes. It's a matter of if a fire officer enters a building and they see fire code violations, they have to be addressed. If the building inspector enters and sees construction without a permit or code issues that have to be addressed, he has to then address that. Having been a building inspector and a health inspector and a code enforcement officer in a past life, I had different statutory responsibilities than my staff might have, than even the city or town manager may have, because they're not the ones who are responsible for enforcing and ensuring enforcement of those particular codes. Now, you can't completely turn a blind eye, but I don't expect the health department or the planning department to know if building permits have been pulled. That's not their responsibility to be able to do that. In terms of clear out, I would contact the building inspector. Can they go in and get merchandise after the 3 days? It's really up to the building inspector how that's allowed. It doesn't mean that they're locked out of the building forever. It's right now there's a fire watch assigned to the building while they're able to go in and retrieve stuff. There'll be an arrangement made with the property owner for anything after that. But if you do need to go in and get items, they should first talk to the property manager. If he's not sure, they could contact the building inspector to let them know. Great comment, Debbie. You can donate to the Cultural Council via the town's website, and they may be able to help assist artists with grants. I think that's great. I think that's sort of the can-do attitude. The cause of the fire is under investigation at this point. It's believed to likely be accidental. The fire itself, again, was not a particularly damaging or devastating fire. It's just it brought firefighters into the building who all of a sudden began to notice a serious number of code and other life safety violations, and they have a statutory responsibility to report those when they see them. But Deborah, that is a great suggestion. Go to the website, donate to the Cultural Council, and we can hopefully maybe get some assistance to these folks. I think I have covered everything I have in what's been a busy week for the town. Tonight at 7 o'clock, we have a review of the town meeting warrant articles. That is it's going to be all of the non-land use articles, so it's everything that doesn't relate to land use. So it's the budget adjustment, the capital plan, and the infrastructure plan, which are important. We are continuing our capital plan as normal, changing sort of how we're going to do some of the financial modeling, and a proposal to do pretty heavy borrowing to do additional road work and line additional water pipes. So as well as a number of bylaw changes and other small items on the warrant. So I encourage you to join us tonight at 7 o'clock. Reminder, tomorrow is the last day to do in-person voting, and 8:30 to 12:30 at Town Hall. Phyllis, that's actually a great question. There's got to be space out there. I mean, we always have vacancies. I think the challenge comes down to what folks can afford, and I'm not terribly familiar with the Commerce Center and the exact mix of studios and everything that were in there, and whether the artists, whether they were studio shops or not. But that might be a great solution, or any of the shops, storefronts in South Norwood. Maybe they could do some sort of a co-op with some of these. But again, I'm not that familiar with exactly what retail was there and what the artists were, or the economics of it. They may have been getting a rate that works for them, and other places in town may not have that rate. I'd hate to lose all of these artists and all of this creative energy completely out of the community. But a good suggestion. And the town meeting info sessions are there. We did talk about our COVID numbers, about being in the red again, unfortunately. It looks like we will be for some time to come. However, our percent positive rate is very low, and testing rates continue to go up. Norwood Hospital will be opening a testing center, I believe, the second week of November, give or take a week there. And hopefully that'll increase testing, which might increase the numbers, but it'll make testing a little bit easier, although we are averaging about 2,700 tests a week now, or about 2,500 tests per 2-week period, in Norwood. We talked a little bit about town meeting also, as well as how we're going to sort of have a digital option for most of town meeting, but we'll still need to go in person to just get a couple of articles set. And we talked about the amazing job the town clerk's office is doing. in particular with us already having a 46% turnout. And we talked about Jim Schmidt retiring from filming at the Senior Center and Peter Kelly retiring after 33 years with the Norwood Police Department. Our first deputy police chief, and a great career he has had with us, and we are going to sorely miss him. With that, any questions you have, you can always email us at managers@norwoodma.gov, or you can post questions here in the comments, and we do try to get them. We talked about this, both the weekly family meals program and school lunch program. If you have kids, go get school lunch, go get school lunch, go get school lunch. With that, we are here to help. Please reach out to us with any questions or comments or concerns that you have. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a happy and safe Halloween, and we're all looking forward to the election next Tuesday. If you haven't voted yet, you can do early voting tomorrow, or next Tuesday, you can get out and vote from 7 to 8 at your regular polling place. Thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and a wonderful, safe weekend.